In our Spotlight segment today, we focus on the state of the global aviation industry. International travel is witnessing something of a rebound in recent months, and that is welcome news for the aviation industry, which suffered heavy losses during the global financial crisis 2 years ago. So can we expect more travelers to take to the skies? And how will the aviation industry cope with the damaging effects on the environment? What of Mother Nature's unexpected disruptions, the most recent being the volcanic eruptions in Chile, which grounded flights in the region? We've got Johan Wijasinghe, who heads the leisure and aviation sector of Haleys, to put things into perspective. Listen in. Welcome, Johan, and good to have you on the show. Now, when you look at our aviation industry, can you just give me a little snapshot about how it is faring?
If you look at 1 year ago to now, you have seen quite a number of new airlines which have started coming into the country. From the point of view of the national carrier, which is the one that has been holding fort for the country in terms of tourism as well as international access to different markets, they themselves, I believe, are on the verge of expanding with new aircraft coming in and also expansion plans to go into places such as Moscow. They've expanded heavily into China. Increasing flights into Europe, that all augurs very well for the industry. In terms of those who have come in, I believe again there is more scope. For example, we do not have any of the national carriers from Europe coming into Sri Lanka. It is a case of time before some of them come in, and that will be very, very important for the industry, aviation as well as for tourism. That's my take on it.
So, IATA recently reported, actually early this month, that international travel has rebounded substantially. In fact, April numbers were revealed as being 16% higher than in the corresponding month of last year. Do you expect this momentum to continue?
They have revisited those numbers. There has been quite a few challenges that have come forth since the initial forecasts were made. 2010 was a great year. We did about 18 billion profitability in the aviation industry compared to 2009, which was a pretty bad one, coming out of recession. However, this year, they've had to revisit their forecast. They've downgraded the numbers. I believe it was about a 78% drop as opposed to last year's profitability. Now they're looking at about 4 billion instead of the 18 billion which was achieved last year. Initial forecast for this year about 8.1 billion. This is significantly because of Japan, the natural disasters there, and also the strife that is been taking place in the Middle East and North Africa. Those all have contributed towards this downturn. Also, very importantly, the increase in oil, the prices. It was forecast at $96, now it has gone to 110, and every single increase in a dollar impacts the aviation industry by about 1.6 billion in terms of cost. So that's a significant number.
Something that came to mind, the airline industry, aviation industry, has been battling some challenges recently, and those are in the air. The volcanic ash from Iceland last year and a near recurrence this year as well. Now, given that countries like China sprayed chemical or had chemical concoctions and sprayed had mass spraying during the Olympics to reduce the smog, does the aviation industry have any remedies like that to at least mitigate some of these situations?
It boils down to one thing, and that's dominantly safety. Safety is one of the most important factors for the aviation industry. If you take a list of customers' reasons for selecting an airline, safety will be paramount, and that's a given over image or price or anything else. And that's one of the reasons why the aviation industry, which is one of the safest modes of transport in the world in every aspect, focuses on safety. They do not want to take a chance on that. In terms of working against natural disasters, it's a tough one. I don't think we've been able to overcome any natural disaster by human intervention. To some degree, yes, you can mitigate the damages, but trying to avoid them is an impossibility. There were some test flights that were done by some of the European carriers during the time of the ash, and they found that the effects on the engines was far less than what it was expected to be. Yet again, safety is paramount, and that's the reason that they still continue to avoid flying when there is a ash cloud which is in the air, particularly over Europe, and we saw it again this year. and that may continue for a while. They haven't been able to find a solution for it. The answer is no.
About airline capacity, how far can we go given that there is high demand, and what are the stumbling blocks in this regard?
Two things. It's not simply aircraft alone. If you look at aircraft orders, the books for Airbus and Boeing, the two main manufacturers, are virtually full. They expect to produce 25,000 aircraft within the next 20 years. That's the Airbus number. Boeing, I think, targets about 30,000. They say that there'll be 30,000 new aircraft. About 15,000 of them will be replacing old aircraft because of some of the 747s are going back to the 60s and 70s. To me, the constraint is more about airport capacity. That's a restraining factor. About 70% of the airlines that operate hub in about 114 airports, whereas there is over 2,000 or 3,000 airports in the world. So if you take Heathrow, for example, there is a massive backlog there. People are looking to get in there, but yet again, you can't expand because of the limitation of runway capacity, limitations of apron capacity, and limitation of gates, resulting in long delays. And also delays impact the aviation industry's profitability as well. For example, every 1 minute that is spent, an aircraft spends in the air, costs you at least $100 additional. So that is an area that they're trying to reduce.
We take a quick commercial break now, and on the other side, Johan Wijesinha talks about oil price volatility and its effects on the aviation industry, plus alternative fuels. Don't go away. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching the Big Picture Business Program, and we continue with more views and insights from Johan Wijesinha.
Now, moving on to one of the critical issues, arguably, and I say arguably because there are other critical issues that come into the fray, climate change, pollution, etc. But how does the airline industry address oil price volatility?
Like every other industry, including the automobile industry, that's something we got to live with. Oil is the second most costly element in an airline in its operations. There is a lot of research that is being applied by the industry, and there's a number of airlines that have already done test flights using alternate fuels, which is biofuels. The leader in this aspect is Lufthansa, where they have scheduled commercial flights for a period of 6 months using A320 aircraft, where they're trying to use anything between 10 and 20% of biofuels to check the long-term viability of utilizing biofuels and its effects on the engines. On the other hand, there are also manufacturers are looking at aircraft which will reduce the usage of fuel. This will be in the form of aerodynamics. I believe quite a number of years ago they brought out the winglets, where you see that at the tips of the wings, you see these vertical upward protrusions. Those are winglets which reduce the drag, and that in turn reduces the amount of fuel that you consume. Going past 2020, they're looking at a new model of an aircraft. Currently, you have what you call the tube and wings manufacture. They're looking at what you would call a molded manufacture, where it will be one molding, where the whole aircraft is molded into one part, which will reduce the amount of drag. They expect that you can reduce about anything between 15 and 20% in terms of fuel usage by these new designs and concepts.
However, Johan, black gold is not infinite. So if you were to gaze into a crystal ball, in 25 years' time, what are the alternatives? Funnily,
if even coconut oil has been tested. So there is a number of different biofuels that can be used, from algae to a number of different wildgrass solutions, which actually produce biofuels. Even cornfields are being looked at. The other aspect is what the automobile industry has done, the hybrids. I wouldn't be surprised if the airline industry starts looking at hybrids, where they have a lower consumption in terms of fossil fuels, but a high generation of electricity as well. It has been done effectively, and very successfully by the automobile industry. And I think that's a learning experience for the aviation industry to look at that as an option as well.
So, here's the next critical issue, climate change. What is the aviation industry doing with regard to climate change, given that it is blamed and criticized by experts as contributing largely to climate change and environmental degradation?
If you look at numbers, it's only about 2% that the aviation industry contributes. If you take the transportation industry as a whole, aviation contributes about 12%, and if you take road transportation, it's about 74%. So there's a bigger problem somewhere else. However, the aviation industry has been extremely responsible on this front. They've taken measures much more than anybody else, trying to cap the emissions. By 2020, they expect that there'll be a 25% reduction in the emissions that are affected currently. This will be achieved through new aircraft, new operational efficiencies, and also by using better, more efficient systems, reducing the amount of time that you spend in the sky, reducing the amount of time that the fuel that you burn when you're on ground. All of those measures are being taken to reduce the impact.
So speaking of that magical number of 2.5 million tourist arrivals, there is a hue and a cry about the government's ambitious target. Why is there such a hue and a cry, given that Bangkok attracts as much as 11 million tourists, and that is what they're expecting this year, and so does Singapore and Hong Kong?
I believe it's to do with the quantum leap. They have progressed towards that number over a long period of time. As I said earlier, the infrastructure developed along with it. Now, for Sri Lanka to move from 600 plus to 2.5, you got to have the infrastructure in place. You got to have the airline capacity. You got to have the airport capacity. The Kattunayake Airport is coming to a point where it's finding there is a problem with apron space as well as gates. They have to expand. All this takes time. If you look at star class category rooms, we have a huge deficit in terms of expectations, in terms of arrivals, as opposed to what we have available. If we have the kind of numbers that we're talking of, we'll have to run at 90 to 95% occupancy throughout the year. So you need those additional rooms, and that's where the investment has to go in. That's one aspect of it. The other is that Sri Lanka has traditionally kept itself confined to culture and beach. We need to expand on that. We need to diversify the kind of offering that we have for the discerning traveler. For example, we don't have a family-friendly environment. We need to develop that. We need to come up with theme parks. We got to have water parks. We got to have, take a good example from Singapore, as you mentioned, such as Boat Quay and Clarke Quay. You need to have those cobblestone roads which are closed off for tourism. That will drive city tourism, which is absent at the moment. Gaming parks, all of those will become important as we go forward. We have so much of waterways, marinas. We need to develop yachting. We need to go into cruise tourism. There is a multitude of areas that we can address. And I think the Tourist Board has taken these on. If you go into some of their planning processes, they have looked at all these and they have plans in place. It is now about the execution.
And that concludes our interview with Johan Wijersinghe. It's time now for another commercial break, and when we return, we take a closer look at Media Services' latest publications. So stay with us.